Welcome to Read the Line Celebrity Insider interview for the week of the Rocket Mortgage Classic. And boy, do I have golf's most genuine guru with me today in the betting space. That's my man, Joe Idone. He's the host of the Preferred Lines podcast. He's on OddsChecker during the week with Jeff Feinberg. You can see his content everywhere. The guy is sharp with a capital S, and I can't wait to have a little conversation with him to preview what's going on up in Detroit, Motown City. Oh, my man Joe. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing wonderful, Keith. What a genuinely nice intro. I appreciate that. Always great to talk to you, my friend. I know like when we get together, we tend to go down all different kinds of tangents. So looking forward to talking a little Rocket Mo. Let's do it, my man.
All right, here we go. We got to start with Detroit Golf Club. Brief tournament history here. When you dive into the tournament history, those 3 years, what stands out in your mind?
A lot of birdies, right? Not a lot of hazards, similar to what we saw last week in Twin Cities, where I think ranks as one of the most, not difficult, but in terms of penalty strokes and the amount of water hazards there are out there, there's a ton. This week there's one. It's on the 14th hole. They have like some of these little drainage ditches along the course, but it doesn't really present too many problems for the players. It's not overly long. It's a little bit narrow. What kind of strikes me, Keith, a little bit is how the scoring has kind of evolved over time. And I don't know your thoughts on this, but it seems to be when a tournament first, when a venue is selected to host a PGA Tour event, they think they set it up difficult. It ain't difficult for these guys. Nate Lashley won at 25 under the first year. And then it got a little bit harder when Bryson won, I think, at 21. Then Cam Davis down to 18. So I feel like they're starting to kind of find their sweet spot in that 15 to 20 under range and be a little bit more comfortable setting this place up more difficult than they're used to that the members would typically play it at. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on in that. I think everyone underestimates how good these guys are at hitting an 8-iron from the middle of the fairway and what their proximity to the hole is. I mean, we look at the numbers. Guys like you and I and the people that watch this, we look at the numbers every week. But do you really think about when someone's proximity to the hole is inside 20 feet, right, from 125 yards over the course of an entire season? I mean, do you really think about how good that is? And then if you had to set up a golf course accordingly and you haven't been doing it with 10 years of history, you're totally spot on there. To see see Lashley go at 25 under, right? And that guy was 353rd in the world when he won. He was a 250 lunchtime long shot there, right? I mean, it's like it. And then now all of a sudden you get a guy like Cam Davis, good young player, and he can only get to 18 under. And that kind of runs me into course conditions, and that has a lot to do with it as well, because I think they also figure out not just the setup and where to put the pins, but also the superintendents kind of figure out how to dry that thing out and make it firm and fast. And sometimes there's years where you can't do that. But this is definitely one of those years where we haven't had a lot of rain in the Northeast. And I'm not quite sure that Detroit is completely the Northeast, but we haven't had a lot of rain up here like you guys maybe have had down in Florida. So when you look at the weather this week, what's the first thing that kind of, you feel like your prediction's pretty solid? Do you think things are going to change? Where do you see the weather going this week?
Yeah, I looked at it a little bit. I don't see it swaying the way I'm going to sort of try and handicap or prognosticate this thing one way or the other. It's a little bit windy on Thursday. What's kind of struck me is like the wind gusts is what really get these guys, right? If it's a steady 15-mile-an-hour wind, they can typically handle it pretty well. But it looks to be they're predicting like around 6 to 8 mile an hour, but then 20 mile an hour gusts, which can really tend to throw these guys off. If there were more hazards, water hazards in play around some of these greens where, you shift 10 yards left of the left side of the green and all of a sudden you're dropping, that would be a lot more of a factor for me. But I feel like if guys are pretty good around the greens and able to get themselves up and down, Donald Ross course, you can probably speak to it more than I can, but I know he's sort of famous for these quadrants and these levels to his greens, and you really want to be on the appropriate section to have a holeable putt. It's not so much about how close you are in terms of proximity. 20 feet down the hill sloping is a lot different than 20 feet up the hill. So being on the correct level, being on the correct quadrant of these greens and really being exacting with your approach shots, I think is going to give you the opportunities to get to 15, 16, 17, 18 under par that's probably going to be required to win.
Got to realize about the golden age of architecture, which is Ross and Flynn and all of those guys that, were making golf courses back in the teens and the 20s. I mean, this place is 1916, right? There were it was shovels, picks, and axes that moved dirt around, right? And like donkeys and stuff. I mean, there was no bulldozers, right? So every green had to be a push-up green. So, Ross and some of these older, golden age architects are always accused of having these like reverse dome greens. Well, like that was the only way they could get them to drain, so that's why that characteristic is there. And then why were they in like certain quadrants and everything? Well, you look at Detroit Golf Club, it's a pretty flat piece of land. The north and the south course, that there's not a lot of elevation change between that entire property, those 36 holes. So how could you challenge people? Well, you could put bunkers in. We've got bunkers on every green site, right, on the 18 holes that we're going to play at the Rocket Mortgage. And those green complexes can get extremely intricate because that's the kind of dirt they could move around. You couldn't like change the way that a fairway would move. I mean, that's hundreds of yards of moving dirt, but you could around a green complex. And I think that's why all of these classic courses, lead you down a road where putting becomes such a challenge, chipping becomes such a challenge. Everyone's looking at strokes gained, short game this week, So the thing about the weather for me is I love to go back like 30 days, and they haven't had much rain in Detroit. They had a little bit last week, a little over an inch, almost an inch and a half. But before that, in the last 30 days, I mean, this place should be perfect to play this week. So I'm thinking like 20 under par, birdie or better, where I know you're going, is definitely something that's in play. Crazy green complexes. Now we're starting to talk about skills a little bit. When you get into the skills needed to win this thing and you look at just 3 years of history, right? What pops up for you, Joe?
I look at the past winners. They've done it a lot with the putter, which is hard from a stats perspective because it's somewhat unreliable and unpredictable. It's really hard to measure who's going to have a really good putting week. I know it's a blend of sort of bent grass and POA, which is always helpful to kind of narrow some things down to what are guys' preferred surfaces. Approach play always comes into play, as I mentioned here. I like to look at off the tee, although I don't think it's quite as important this week. What I will say is I think that off the tee strokes gain stats are the most pure form and the most unflawed form of strokes gain stats. Everyone is starting from the same spot. When you start to get into approach and around the green, there's so many factors that are built into those stats that you don't necessarily see. Are they short-sided? Were they on a tough lie? Are they going to a left pin? Are they going to a right pin? What side of the fairway are they on? Off the tee's pure, right? I'm looking at the birdie or better stats, which you mentioned, some opportunities gained. And a big one for me is like driving distance. I don't know how many people are going to pull that in, but the way that Bryson played this place, there's 4 par 4s that are sub 400 yards that you can get close to the green. The way Bryson plays is a lot the way that Cam Davis sort of approaches the game. Now, he's not as long as Bryson, but he's another winner in that mold that I'm going to take driver everywhere. I'm going to get it as close to the green as possible. I'm going to play this place extremely aggressive. And if it goes wrong, Keith, it goes wrong. But when it goes right, I've got the chance to win. Like, I'm not playing for top 30 finishes. I'm playing for that week once or twice a year when things go right and I have the opportunity on a Sunday to close the deal. So those are some of the things that I'm sort of factoring in from a stat model perspective this week.
That up, kind of the bomb and gouge tactic. If you look at all the young players that are coming up and all the names that we know, the Cam Youngs of the world, like a Cam Davis, maybe they're all named Cam, I don't know. But, there's very few Zach Johnsons that come up through the ranks anymore. Your plotters, your technicians. Right. And it's always kind of interesting. I mean, if you look at the Korn Ferry Tour, it's all bombers. It's all guys that when they're hot, they can get to 25 under on an average golf course, which is kind of crazy when you think about like the level of talent that's out there. It's pretty cool. For me, this place, I think a lot of it's going to be defined by wedge play. And I think it's going to be, and you mentioned it already, and you're spot on. It's the greens. The thing for me, just as a quick aside, and we do this, you and I do this all the time, but like The fact that people think that off the tee is the most accurately measurable strokes gained statistic, and guys are hitting the ball over 300 yards in the air, but yet putting is the least, and we're just rolling it 10 feet on the ground. I mean, the irony in that for me, as someone who's taught the game, it's like, man, if somebody wanted a lesson, you wanted me to help them. I mean, it's much easier to fix putting than it is to fix the driver. I don't know. It's just one of those unique things about golf that really. But I'm with you though. Off the tee, they're in the same spot. They're looking at the same angles, and they have the same job to do. Whereas you could be uphill, downhill, side hill with putting. There's a lot more factors involved. Speaking of putters, right? Is there a certain putting stat that you're looking at this week in particular that helps define, is it three putt avoidance, or is it something else that helps define who's going to be your best putter or who's going to gain the most strokes on the greens this week?
Like I kind of mentioned, it's tough to measure with putting. There are ups and downs with every player. I like to look at a little bit more long-term form with putting than basically any other stat, because I do feel like there's a variability there week to week. Like you mentioned, are you coming uphill? Are you downhill? Is it, for a right-handed guy, is it you're getting more left to right putts or right to left putts? A lot of guys have preferred situations where they are going to be a better putter, and they are going to putt more so to make it versus trying to lag it up there and two putt from 35 feet. I'm going to look a little bit more long-term stats with putting, always minimum like 36 rounds up to 50, 100 rounds. I do try to typically select if you have the variability when you're looking at stat models in terms of different surfaces. So I believe it's predominantly bent grass this week with a little bit of POA in there. So, these guys have these, and more than anybody, Keith, depending on what region they grew up in and where they're familiar putting, like people come down here to Florida and they struggle with the grain a lot of times in these Bermuda grass courses from the Northeast. When my friends come down here, I feel like I've got a big leg up on them just being used to it. So looking at where they're comfortable, where their stats are showing that the splits are in favor of, those are some of the things that I look to isolate with putting.
I'm going to shift gears for a second on you. This show isn't sponsored by the PGA Tour or anything like that, but we got to talk about the FedEx Cup. We got 2 weeks to go, and guys are it's not so much the playoffs, but when they're around that 125 number, they're vying for their job next year, to keep their cards. And I know there's a lot of unknowns. I think I counted 9 guys that are in the top 125 that went to live. So maybe that number extends out to like 133, 134. I don't know why those guys haven't been removed yet. But do you think that the guys are right around the bubble? That those guys are thinking about that, and that's a little extra motivation. Maybe somebody you may sprinkle this week because let's say it's Webb at 125, or it's Chesson Hadley at 130, or Ricky Fowler at 132. Do you think they're aware of that, and that adds a little extra motivation?
I think they're aware of it 100%. Motivation is a tricky one when it comes to handicapping because it really boils down to the individual and is hard to encompass everyone in the same bucket. Motivation in this instance with the FedEx cut line being at 125 in order to get into the St. Jude basically boils down to pressure, right? And pressure can affect different players in an extremely negative way, and it can affect players in an extremely positive way. So it really is hard to sort of look at someone and say, okay, they're 136 this week. I know they've got to move up a couple of spots. That additional pressure is on their shoulders to perform this week. Is that going to elevate their game, or could that make them potentially make decisions that are costly and riskier than they would normally make? It's hard for me to really put someone, give it a positive or a negative spin on an individual player. There are some guys that Ricky, like, it's funny, we all talk about Ricky, right? When Ricky had his best year in 2015, he won the Players, he won the Scottish, I think he won the Deutsche Bank that year as well. The number one player in 2015 was Jason Day. We don't really ever talk about Jason Day and this collapse that he's sort of on, but he's right now on the outside looking in. I think both guys right now, when you mentioned when they remove the 8 or 9 Live Tour players, are going to be just inside of that, but they're right on the fringe. So those are guys, like, to me, that there's additional pressure because of their name value, because of where they once were, right? And this massive fall from grace, like it's going to be a little bit embarrassing for them, I feel like, in a degree, to not get into that 125 versus some young up-and-coming players in their rookie or maybe second year where they're like, let me go get this. Like, this is my opportunity. For them, it's more like, I've got to hold on to this spot. I haven't won in a couple of years. I need to keep a PGA Tour card.
Well, I'll tell you, you bring up Jason Day, and his motivation might just be he's one of less than 10 guys that's played in every playoffs. All right. And when do you want that streak to end? And I know he doesn't want it to end now, and he's fought injuries and everything, but he's definitely one of the, he can't just let it slide for 2 weeks, though. He's got to play good in order to get there. So it'll be interesting. Jason Day, huge name. Ricky Fowler, huge name. We do have some good names at the top of this leaderboard. Cantley, Homa, flavor of the week, Cam Young, a lot of these guys. When you look at the favorites, who are you leaning towards?
So I would lean towards Cam Young. He's my guy. I know he's your guy too. I was on him at the Open Championship, so he made a very fun run for me there. I do like what I'll say about Cam Young is I like for the narrative maybe to be a little bit quieter on Cam Young with a guy like these young players that are up and coming from a betting perspective, right? They get this, they get really hot and everyone wants to jump on board because they want to be on the new flavor of the month and this new young stud coming up, and they get really popular, which decreases their betting number. But they have a couple of bad weeks and you see that number float to like 125 to 1 at the Open. Now he's up there at 20 to 1. I will say this though, I feel like he is most likely of all the guys at the top to be aggressive and take this place apart in a way that we saw Bryson do it, in a way that we saw Matthew Wolff do it, in a way that we saw Cameron Davis do it, in a way that we saw Joaquin Niemann do it for 72 holes last year where he didn't make a bogey, which is I'm going to pound my driver everywhere, and if I rest one up against a tree and I got to chip out sideways, so be it. But if not, I've got to get up and down from 50 to 100 yards on every hole, and I'm going to make my fair share of birdies and really take advantage of those par fives. I think he's the best off the tee guy in this field and potentially like on the PGA Tour right now. He's unbelievable with the driver.
Yeah, you worried about the putter with Cam at all?
I think he's a good putter. I really do think he's a good putter. The one, the other guy I really like, honestly, is Cam Davis. Now, I hit Cam Davis here last year. He's a little bit longer, right around the 30 to 1 range. But he's playing fantastic right now. The form is much better than it was incoming last year. Had one bad round last week at the 3M, rebounded to still finish like top 16. 8th place at the John Deere. The approach numbers have been really good for him, and he's maybe a little bit of a discounted version, I think, of Cameron Young. Another Cam. What's up with the Cams, Keith? Is that like, if you name your kid Cam right now, are they guaranteed to be at least on the Korn Ferry Tour?
It's kind of a very unique thing. Cam Smith, Cam Tringali. It just goes on and on and on. It's pretty funny. Speaking of going on, let's go down the list a little bit. Middle tier guys, who do you like?
I'll give you one. Chris Kirk. I don't feel like he's all that popular this week. I got him at 60 to 1 coming in. A couple of good finishes at the Rocket Mortgage the last 2 years. So I believe a 21st and like a 15th or something like that. He's played this course well. He is a great blend of distance and accuracy. He's a really good total driver. So he's not short, I wouldn't say, off the tee, but he's finds himself in a lot of fairways and he's pretty straight. Really underrated short game and around the green touch for a guy like Chris Kirk. He's found himself on a ton of leaderboards this year on Sunday, as I know the Arnold Palmer, there's a few others in there. He's a guy that I like sort of in that 50, 60 to 1 range. Another one that I have is Troy Merritt. So Troy, I believe, unbelievably, led the field in off the tee last week at the 3M, which is certainly not a Troy Merritt stat that you would ever think you were going to see. It was terrible with the putter. He's a good putter. He found himself into that playoff last year against Cam Davis, so good form. He loves himself a birdie fest. His numbers tend to elevate on courses that get to around 20 under par. He seems to bring his game up. That sort of fits his style of play, is to be very aggressive and try to make a lot of birdies. Those are two guys in sort of that beefy mid-range that I like.
Something like win equity. in an event like this, which isn't really like an API. It's certainly not a major, but it's not an API. It's not Riviera, right? Do you think win equity plays that big a role, or are we at a point in the season where these guys, they know what they're doing, whether it's Cam Young or I'm going to throw a name out to you like Denny McCarthy, right? Can he pull the trigger on a win here because it's a good course fit, because finally he's comfortable enough to do it?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, the feel if you take, we're not sure what we're going to get necessarily out of Finau at the top coming off a win. We could even potentially see a withdrawal out of him. Patrick Cantlay, like the thing is there is a lot of motivation for the players at the top this week. So Patrick Cantlay, reigning FedEx Cup champion, wants to build as many points as he can because he knows how important that starting strokes format is going to be at Eastlake. He knows the importance of that. He wants to retain that title. Zalatoris, Cam Young, two guys still looking for their PGA Tour victory, right? They have a ton of motivation there. So the guys at the top, I think, are going to be super motivated. And what we've kind of seen lately with Finau being the favorite at the 3M, with Rory being the favorite at the Canadian, is a little bit of boost and maybe not seeing quite as many long shots, I feel like, this year as others. But as always, you know me, Keith, there's a couple of guys down there I'm always a little interested in.
You said it already. Lunchtime, baby. You may not be watching this at lunchtime, but if you know my man Joe Idone, he has his lunchtime long shots, and he hits them. Over the course of a PGA Tour season, he will hit a couple of these. So don't stop the video yet. Come on. Give me a lunchtime long shot for the rocket. Who's going to rocket to the top from the bottom of the list? Come on.
I got one for you that's been on an ascending rocket-like rise. How about Callum Tarran? Guy's been playing really well. First caught my eye at the U.S. Open, honestly, where he I believe he was leading through the second round there, played really well. I started to look at the way that he plays the game, and it is very much in a mold that you talked about a lot of the younger players have, where they're going to take the place apart with the driver. He's 7th in the field in driving distance. He's very underratedly, I think, long off the tee. Good performance last week incoming, played really well with the John Deere as well, where he was in there for quite a bit. He really struggled when he first got onto the PGA Tour. He's found his groove. He's in fantastic form, even played well last week at the 3M, where I believe he shot like a 30 on the back 9 to creep inside like the top 7. So the confidence is there, the form is there, the distance is there, and you're getting triple digits at 100 to 1. You can sign me up.
126 on the FedEx Cup point list as well, Callum Tarran. He's got a little side motivation because that guy, his card's not guaranteed. Jason Day will get to play a bunch next year, even if he didn't make it inside that number. So yes. Definitely a guy there. I'm going to go with, for a long shot, Chesson Hadley. Oh yeah, man. Georgia Tech guy, loves to make those birdies, and he could flat out roll the rock. So keep an eye on him too, there, Mr. Idone. I know you scan that list better than anybody at 150 to 1 and over, and you hit all the time. Look at Cam Davis here last year, perfect example. Which is why I wanted to talk to you this week, because I know you know when it comes to the Rocket Mortgage Classic, man. Can't thank you enough for the time. I hope you have a great day. Appreciate you being on Read the Lines, Celebrity Insider Show.